Hey everybody, this is Dennis with the Eclectic Gamers Podcast, and I am going to review Lord of the Rings Gollum, which I have finally finished playing, and I said I'd put a video together, which is not something I usually do for video games, but I captured all the footage, my roughly 14 hours of footage from playing the game. I played it on the Xbox Series X, and so let's go ahead and get into it. Nope, there will be spoilers. So, as everyone heard, and just needs to be confirmed up front, this is not a particularly good game. It's not the worst game ever. It's not the worst game I played. It's probably not even the worst game of 2023. But it is bad, and it cannot really be recommended. On its surface, the game bills itself and is primarily a platform stealth game. And I would say in that order, with most of the time being spent platforming. However, for a game that I believe is estimated to take most people about 8 to 10 hours, if you don't get stuck on any sort of occasional puzzle, most of which are not all that challenging, the game itself feels like it's stretching. It's stretching so much stuff out. So, just real quick, in terms of the plot, you are playing as Gollum. You are all by yourself. You've lost your ring to Bilbo Baggins already. And then because you are not a particularly smart Gollum, you inadvertently end up in the hands of the orcs. And most of the game consists of two major set pieces. You being with the orcs, trying to escape and getting recaptured. And you being with the elves and trying to escape and you getting recaptured. And then finally, setting up for Fellowship of the Ring, you get away. So that's the storyline. The storyline is terrible. The reason Gollum falls into the orc's hands is because he's chasing a bug, which is stupid. And then he has to just do these menial tasks, I assume for the war effort for Sauron to get ready. But all of a sudden, you have entered into this game, which bills itself as a platformer with stealth elements, and you find yourself playing Sim Farm. So you have to herd animals. You have to feed the fish. You have to help with mining efforts. I'm expanding what a farm really is in the context of it. Well, it's an orc farm. This is what orcs end up farming. So you have these menial tasks that you do, and a lot of the game, the first part of the game, is really just doing those, going back to your cell, doing a different menial chore, going back to your cell. Some of these things, like the fish feeding thing, they don't repeat. And that it's good because it wasn't fun, but it also means this game explores a lot of concepts and then doesn't revisit them or takes very little advantage of them. A couple other case in points. There's a segment in the game where there are a lot of little spiders around. And you've never really had to deal with little spiders. And so you have to basically, while climbing, get past them. It's one of those where it's really, avoid detection, but it's not a typical stealth section because you're climbing. So it's about avoidance and like watching the paths and stuff. And that format, it was challenging in a way. It wasn't overly hard. Nothing about the game is overly hard, though you will likely die a lot because of the poor programming. But they don't ever revisit that format. That instrument of platform stealth just goes away. Another case in point, and this one I was very grateful for it to go away. It was probably my worst section. It was deeply frustrating. It reminded me of an old Resident Evil game where you've got a scene with Shelob, the giant spider, and you need to run away from her or else she'll eat you. And it becomes one of those, the camera is, you're running towards it instead of the camera being behind you. And you have to go left and right and jump and dodge the obstacles like Battletoads style. It's terrible. It's frustrating. They even mark the path for you. I didn't even realize what the markings were at first. I just thought it was what lame decor they were able to work into the textures. And then I finally realized it was supposed to be a hint to help you know which way to go so that you could make it to the next checkpoint. But it's not a fun mechanic, and it's only in there that one time. Doesn't make any sense. There's another one-time mechanic, a little bit better than that one, but equally, I think, frustrating in a large part because you need to ride on some carts, and then it's like an endless runner. You're not actually the one running, you're on the cart, but you gotta hang off the left side, hang off the right side, jump over an obstacle, hang off the back, jump on top of an obstacle, run across it, and jump on the cart. And they don't explain any of this stuff. So I didn't realize that the carts just kept coming. So I got up on top of an obstacle, couldn't figure out a way to actually get back on my same cart. Like, I thought I just wasn't being fast enough. Eventually, I hit a checkpoint, and the checkpoints, incidentally, are haphazard. They remind me of Halo games, at least the early Halo games, where you might be able to force a checkpoint, because sometimes you don't get a checkpoint for a while. Other times, you get plenty of checkpoints. And there were instances where I wasn't getting a checkpoint until I did. And I didn't really get any further because I just kept dying. But anyway, they never told me that multiple carts were coming. I thought there was one cart with one chance to escape, not, well, if you mess up, you can just hang out here and then jump down on the next one that's coming along. Just things like that. The whole direction of the game is confusing to me. And by that, I mean the pathing. So in one way, it's laid out very obvious. The obstacles you can climb, all that stuff it's not blended in at all. It doesn't even necessarily look very much like the environments that they are attached to. I'd say the elf section looks a bit better than the orc section, but it's all still, by and large, pretty easy to see what things you can hang on to, what things you can climb. Gollum has his special, Gollum vision. At least that's what I call it, his sense. He basically can see orcs through walls and stuff. If you ever played one of the Arkham games, like Batman's Vision, that's what it reminded me of. And that lets you see the pathing that you're supposed to go. It's like some little orange, I guess, bouncing in the direction you're supposed to be. But it's inconsistent. It is usually present, but I've had instances where I've followed the path and then I reactivate and it just shows me the path I just took coming towards me. It doesn't show me where else to go. And so there were several instances I just had to load up a help guide just to try and figure out, am I going left now or am I going right? I see lots of things I can hold on to. It's not making a lot of sense. There was a part in a game where there was a barrier to the path and you had to touch it and then the barrier fell. I don't think they ever used that thing again. Another feature that they never repeated, but there was never a hint that Gollum could push stuff down. So it was weird. The puzzles, I'm not going to say they were overly weird. A lot of them, they're fairly basic, but in some ways they might frustrate you. I actually get more frustrated by them than I think maybe most people would. And that was simply because I might just have a lot of difficulty finding some particular element, or there was one puzzle where I was almost there and I guess I was misinterpreting one piece. So of course I was messing up the puzzle. But they're not very many. They're not very many, and by and large, you would consider them basic. They're not any worse than a Resident Evil puzzle would be. In fact, they're probably by and large easier, most of them. Then there's the decision making. Now, this is probably when the game was announced. I would say this was the part that actually got me the most excited, was the idea of, okay, you've got this situation. You need to decide, are you going to do it like the Schmeagol way or are you going to do it the Gollum way? It's super lame. It's barely used. It doesn't really make any difference in the direction of the story. And I'm not too surprised about that aspect. But it's basically when those moments come up, you have to argue. You'll get choices and you have to argue with yourself to try and have the Gollum argument win or the Schmeagol argument win, depending which way you want to go with. And as near as I can tell, the only difference is whichever direction you choose to start with gets one tick. It's like best out of 3 or best out of 5 of the arguments, like a rock, paper, scissors thing almost. I won every argument but one. And again, there weren't all that many. And I suppose it didn't matter other than I think if I had won I did Gollum. I played them all as Gollum that I could recall, unless it didn't seem like it was as interesting of a story choice. But there were some achievements associated. As it turned out, I didn't know ahead of time because I didn't look, about trying to do it all one way. And I didn't get that, but I knew I had failed one. Not that it really matters. So anyway, it was a poorly used feature that didn't come up very much. Gollum can strangle orcs to death. He can throttle them. It does take a long time, which is realistic because he's pretty small. But you don't get to do it very much because for some strange reason, Gollum can't choke orcs that wear helmets. I don't know how the helmet protects the neck, but somehow it makes you Gollum-proof, and almost all the orcs wear helmets. So it's not a mechanic that comes up very much. The platforming itself is pretty basic. I would put it on par in terms of what it expects of you, or challenge level, if it's working right, to that of the modern Tomb Raider games. So they're not very many. This ain't no Super Meat Boy, okay? You're not going to really struggle with the platforming mechanics. Generally, if you're struggling to like stick the platforming, you're probably going the wrong direction in most instances. But that's not to say that the game will not cheat you of a proper platforming element at some stage, because it's more than happy to. This is very common with camera angle issues, especially in instances, particularly in the later game where Gollum starts to be expected to jump backwards a lot more, and you can't really see where you're going. But you'll find that in most instances, it will give you that backwards jump prompt when you are in position to actually achieve the grab. So again, it's something, there are things like that come up, but that is the main gameplay mechanic, is the platforming. The stealth is not fun. But I do need to disclose, I generally don't like stealth games, or I don't like to have to play really stealthy in stealth games. The stealth segments are very, very basic. It would make sense to do the stealth elements because obviously Gollum is supposed to be quite sneaky, but it's all very basic fare. There will be guards that'll patrol in a direction, so you just wait and you go from one set of shadows to the next. There are a few instances where you'll throw rocks to put out lanterns, or you'll throw rocks to distract the guards, though again, in a programming fail, there were parts where I'd throw the rock, hit the sound making device, and the orc wouldn't actually go over to it. And I thought, well, maybe I need to be faster. And again, it just the orc kind of quasi-triggered, but the orc was supposed to walk over there and investigate. It didn't always happen. Sometimes I had to throw 2 rocks. Sometimes I would mess up and I would die, and then the rock would work the very next time, and the checkpoint was right where I was at. So again, it just, none of it makes sense. The game doesn't look very good. Gollum looks terrible. Yeah, there's like a feature at the start of the game, or in the settings, I should say, where you can like turn on, I think it was his dynamic hair or something. I don't know if it makes a difference. I turned it on. He still looked terrible. All the faces look terrible. The story is awful. It doesn't disrupt canon too much. A lot of the part where you're with the orcs is actually told in flashback, like Gollum's talking to Gandalf. Now, maybe that syncs up okay with the books. I don't remember. It's been so long since I've read them. But like with the movies, Gandalf implies, or indicates, I believe, to Frodo Baggins that he couldn't find Gollum. Well, in this game, he did, or the elves found him, and that's how Gandalf learns what Gollum said to the wraiths, so that they knew that the ring was in the Shire, basically. So that's how they kind of tried to tie that in. But there's this like big, long discussion of Gandalf and Gollum interacting, and I don't remember well enough in the books, but obviously it doesn't align with movie canon. But I wouldn't say this is, obviously it doesn't look like the movies. It doesn't look like Shadows of Mordor, a game that is much older and much better looking. That's a bit of a letdown. And I get it. They couldn't do a whole lot. I think the hope was to add some complexity to the character, because what I want to end on is kind of the big question is not the who, what, when, where. It's the why. Why Gollum? Why are we playing as him? He is a thoroughly unlikable character. He's not as interesting of a villain as Sauron or Saruman. There is depth to his character. Obviously, the duality that gets explored with Gollum, I think they thought would be interesting, and given his Gangle-like nature, they thought that it would make for a good platformer. So, like, the acorn of gameplay behind it is there, but because we know Gollum dies at the end of the books, and because this is happening between when he lost the ring and when he runs into the Fellowship, there's only so much that you can explore, because you know what his personality is coming in to Fellowship. So, okay, maybe we're telling it kind of like a Greek tragedy, where you go in or as I understood it with the ancient Greeks, where you were to go in knowing how the ending was. That was the idea. But it just, it doesn't matter. Everything you do, he just comes across as Gollum. It doesn't matter. When I played around with some of the Smeagol choices, it doesn't really matter. In the prison, there's a part where there's a whole sub-story. There are a lot of these little sub-stories. It just feels like they're just stretching things out for no reason. The game feels too long as it is. I thought the game was going to feel short until I realized I had to do the whole thing with the elves. So given that, it was just like, why? There's like fellow prisoners. Are they going to stage a prison break? There's this Candleman guy who's a sorcerer who runs the the prison system, and he wants you to do stuff for him, but none of it manifests. That does bring up the issue of glitches. Now, I actually had a relatively smooth experience in terms of gameplay glitches. So not a lot of stuff that I think I had to force a reload twice because Gollum got stuck or something didn't load right or something of that nature. But by and large, the game stayed functional. Lots of frame rate drops, though. Lots of frame rate drops. So it's not a smooth experience, which given how ugly the game is, it's not like they're using high-end textures here. That's very disappointing. The other thing, though, that drove me mad was at some point there was a load where Gollum talks about the Candleman, the Riddle Master, whatever. They call him different things. And he talks about, like, what does he want with us? What does he want with us, precious? And it just basically started playing for the rest of the game every time I died and then auto-loaded.
What does it want from us, this sorcerer? Ask riddle questions, perhaps. Rip our hearts out with his claws. Does it want from us, this sorcerer? Ask riddle questions, perhaps. What does it want from us, this sorcerer? Ask riddle questions, perhaps. Rip our hearts out with his claws. But we knows riddles too, don't we, my precious? What does it want from us, this sorcerer? Ask riddle questions, perhaps. Rip our hearts out with his claws. What does it want from us, this sorcerer? What would she have asked to say? What does it want from us, this sorcerer? Ask riddle questions, perhaps. Rip our hearts out with his claws. But we knows riddles too, don't we, my precious?
It was maddening. The exact same line. Chapters and chapters later, he's talking about this guy you haven't seen in like 3 chapters. And it's just like, what is this? I did hard reloads. It never fixed. It never fixed. It was always a problem. So kind of like Lord of the Rings Gollum. It's always a problem. If you enjoy bad games, this one is pretty playable. So you can give it a shot, but don't play it. Just accept that it was a maybe interesting idea that turned into a not maybe bad game. But that's it for me. Thanks so much for watching this review video. And if you enjoyed it, give it a like. And other than that, I have another YouTube channel. I'll have a link in the video description to my Watches with Dennis channel. That's where I normally do YouTube stuff. I don't usually do it for the Eclectic Gamer stuff. But if you like wristwatches, we can talk about that over there. And otherwise, just have a really good day.